Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today.
Again, God bless you. You're watching One Nation, One Voice, where we believe in love for all, truth for all, justice for all. We truly believe in equality for everyone, and we believe that Nigeria will be great and rise from the ashes. We have a visionary on the set, Eke Okumone, who will be answering some questions about Nigeria and the mismanagement of resources. The theme today, the Q&A theme today, is suffering in the midst of abundance. As many Nigerians will know, that there's a lot of resources in Nigeria, and yet they're untapped, and yet the masses are suffering. So today we're going to dive into those questions. But before I do, I just want to welcome Eke Okumone. Thank you. Welcome again.
Thank you so much again, for having me in the studio on the Revealed Word Network. What can I say? I'm very, very thankful, and I'd like to say greet all of those that are joining us today.
Yes. Thank you for joining us. We're going to dive right into it because we have a few questions and we want to go right into it. So the first question that we have here is, why did you title the Q&A today, the suffering in the midst of abundance?
Well, for me, when you look at Nigeria, before we even speak about the 50 major resources that are in Nigeria, before we even speak about the abundance and of plethora, the plethora of abundant resources in Nigeria in every state, we have to look at a country that is extremely blessed, richly laden with every kind of resource, including the human resources. And yet we find a people that are suffering, being oppressed and suppressed over countless decades by governments, successive governments. We find a situation where people are not finding justice. They're in prison, they haven't committed a crime, they're in prison. They don't have enough means to provide decent healthcare for their families. For anyone who has visited Nigeria and has seen people in that terrible state where, you're going for healthcare, they're going for healthcare, and they don't have the resources to pay for their loved one or for themselves, and find themselves, for their loved one, obviously, and find themselves in that situation where they have no money and that loved one dies. How tragic is that? And then you think about, again, like I was speaking about the justice system, and you think about people that are in prison for crimes that they haven't committed. How awful is that? And then you think about the average Nigerian living on approximately $2 to $5 a day, while the elite or those who are in government are, we know, many times embezzling billions of dollars. So you see a country that, again, like I said, richly laden with almost every resource you could think of, a country that's supposed to be self-sufficient, and the people are suffering, can't provide decent healthcare, can't provide good education, can't provide running electricity, constant electricity, can't provide running water, can't provide good roads. So people are suffering in the midst of abundance. I mean, honestly, it is almost heartbreaking, really, when you think about if Nigeria wasn't so wealthy, wasn't so rich in terms of resources, then maybe we wouldn't be complaining today. But it is, and our people are really suffering. It's tragic.
That is truly sad, and you know as well, we talk about this often, and we speak about this, about the many resources that Nigeria has. They're untapped. People are still suffering. People are living in less than $2 a day in Nigeria that has so much. And then you have the disparity between the very wealthy and the very poor, and the politicians and the people who are stealing and taking money, and yet the Nigerian people are not getting it. So that theme, like suffering in the midst of abundance, is truly true, where there's so much abundance, so much resources on the land, and yet people are suffering, right?
Absolutely.
So that leads me to other question that we have. Nigeria has other resources than oil. Can you just list a few of them, or do you think Nigeria has more resources than oil?
Nigeria definitely has a lot more resources than oil. I want to give you some interesting facts. Before the Civil War, see, one thing we can say about the British, as much as people always complain about how they formulated the country and how they run the country, yeah, I agree. They didn't run it for the interests of the Nigerian people. I agree with that, and they didn't do that in many colonial countries or ex-colonial countries. The British government didn't do that. But one thing I can say about the British is that generally their administration, the way that they administrated the country to a certain extent, not in regards to the people, but in regards to resources, is far better than the Nigerian governments have done since independence. So coming to the point that you were making about, are there other resources apart from oil? There are, and I want to state for a fact that many of the things that we now import in terms of agricultural products, I don't know how many Nigerians know this, but I'm going to tell you now that did you know that Nigeria was actually self-sufficient agriculturally until the end of the Nigerian Civil War? That's crazy. We've gone from a country that was self-sufficient agriculturally, and now we've gone to a country that is importing almost 90% of its goods. That is crazy. So now, if you talk about resources, let's look at a few of them. So I said there's 50 major resources in Nigeria, and if you get the chance, go onto the One Nation One Voice Facebook page and look at mismanagement of resources. You will see the abundant resources that we do have. However, I want to take a few of the resources here, because when we think about these mineral resources, many times we don't think about the byproducts that come from these resources. So let's just take a few now. So for instance, liquid gas. Right. When you're producing oil, one of those byproducts is gas and gas flaring. Nigeria actually accounts for $7 billion of waste of gas being burnt.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow.
And that's almost annually. That is absolutely phenomenal waste.
Wow.
Yeah? Considering that Nigeria actually imports 1.25 million barrels of LPG, which is liquid petroleum gas, from the US. So you go and figure, does it make sense? We produce it, we burn it, we waste it, and then we go and import it.
Wow.
which is which is madness, which is utter madness. And then if you look at other statistics, I'm going to go to other statistics. If the Nigerian government invested $24 billion, right, they could produce approximately 800,000 tons of let me go into it. So I'm not going to misquote this. But according to statistics, if they were to invest 25 billion, it's actually worse. If the Nigerian government were to invest 25 billion into expansion of the oil and gas industry in Nigeria, it would unveil potentially 600 trillion cubic feet of natural gas.
Wow.
And that's just oil. That's just oil and gas. And then you talk about the other resources that Nigeria has, which are untapped as well. Gold, for instance. Gold mining peaked in the 1930s and going up into the Second World War, where the British stopped mining for coal. The Nigerian government hasn't necessarily continued with that. So now we just have abundance of coal, which we could use for power generation as well. We're not tapping it. Gold, a similar thing, 1930s to the Second World War. Gold is no longer mined on a massive scale. And yet we have reserves of over 600,000 ounces of high quality gold. Bitumen, which you use to make tar, which you use for roads and the like. We have an estimated reserves of 4.2 billion barrels. Actually, it's even more than that. So, you know, we could go on and on and on and on. And then we have columbite, which produces niobium, and tantalum, which can be used for alloy superconductors and electronic components, which also could produce electronic equipment, mobile phones, DVD players, video game systems, computers, and the like. We could just keep on going on and on and on. We have limestone, we have lead zinc, we have diamonds, we have uranium. So actually we could have nuclear power reactors. I don't know how safe I would consider them to be, but generally they can be quite safe, as we've seen in some other countries in the Western world. So we have all of these resources, but they're not being tapped. They're not being tapped. And I want to say, for the record, I remember speaking to a Buhari supporter. I'm going to put that. I don't really mind who people support, to be honest with you, but a Buhari supporter, and he said, "Well, you know, you can't use your saliva to mine resources. So you can't blame this Buhari government because you can't mine resources with saliva or with your bare hands." But that shows me lack of planning of a government and lack of vision. Because when Buhari was in power between 1983 to 1985, he still didn't try to tap those resources. We still were heavily dependent on oil. And I'm not saying the problems start or will end with Buhari. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that what Nigeria needs is visionary, strong, bold, and wise leaders that have goals and plans for the country. Without that, you're still going to be in that situation where we'll be suffering in the midst of abundance.
Wow. That, I mean, when you think about it, it's truly sad that we have all these resources, all these avenues to better the economy of Nigeria, and yet our government is not doing that. Why do you think they're so dependent on oil? Why is everyone always oil? You mentioned right now we have gold, and if anyone hasn't, there's a page on our Facebook page called Mismanagement of Resources that gives a very detailed views of how many resources we have in each state. Like, I can just list a few. You know, there is gold, there is zinc, there's limestone. You know, we have uranium, like you said, dolomite,
iron ore.
All these things can lead. I mean, it's crazy that in a country that we have so much natural resources, we're importing kerosene. We can't even make pencils. We can't even make, and with people, and you also last week you mentioned about the human resources as well. You know, China, one of the strengths of China and India is that they use their people. You know, like you had mentioned in the post that there's a potential for 80,000 jobs in this steel mine. Can you just mention a little bit about that?
That steel mine that was built in 1979 but has never been switched on. That's something is just ridiculous, and I'll touch on that steel mine in a second, but I just want to say that shows you, as most Nigerians probably know by now, that the reason why that's happened is because a government was in power, awarded the contract, and then wasn't in power at some point in time. Another government comes in. That's what happens many a times in Nigeria, and doesn't continue it because they're not going to make a quick buck from those contracts. So they'll make those contracts null and void and then start new contracts, which is just a general cycle in Nigeria. But yes, they're still factoring in, I want to try to pronounce it properly, in Jakarta, you know, is still there, and it still hasn't been switched on, and it potentially, and if you want to talk about jobs, potentially it could produce, just that steel mine alone could produce 80,000 jobs.
Wow.
Now, I don't know about those that are watching at home, but for me, I know that for many Nigerians that come out of university and don't have the family connections and don't have the wealth and find themselves even 10, 15, 20 years without a job, without a job that matches their skill set. You will find them at the motor parks looking for any job, any labor job. But many of them may have degrees, science field degrees or engineering degrees, and they can't get a job. 80,000 jobs could be yielded from the Ajokota steel factory.
Wow.
Now, that's just that. But then we mentioned about that $24 billion investment into the oil and gas industry. You're going to be shocked. That could produce 800,000 jobs.
Wow.
So now when you think about it, if Nigeria was actually mining many of these resources that it has, how many jobs could we create?
Wow.
And that's just from resources.
Wow. Wow. So basically, you're saying God already gave us the resources for the country, but they're untapped because we have greedy people. But why do you think Nigeria is so dependent on oil?
To be honest with you, oil. You see, the thing. There's a much deeper answer to this. I've been speaking about diversification of the Nigerian economy for about 40 years. That's, I mean, for those of you that know my age, you can imagine what age I was when I was speaking about it. But for you to be speaking about diversification of the Nigerian economy 40 years ago, or even now, I wouldn't say now because we're forced into a situation, but for you to be doing that over decades, you would have to have some form of vision for Nigeria, and at least some form of understanding of what Nigeria has. I often look at it as, if you go into that mismanagement of resources piece that I wrote on One Nation, One Voice, you see a man standing on ladders, on abundant ladders, trying to climb over a wall. That's how I see the Nigerians, and I see the Nigerian leaders, or those who have been in power. You have the resources, but many of them don't even know that those resources are there, and that's why. And that's the same with the Nigerian people. So many of the Nigerian people now think that Nigeria is dependent on oil. Nigeria is not dependent on oil. Nigeria is not dependent on oil by any means or any form. That is the truth. But what we have found is that oil is very easy to tap, to make that money, and for you to embezzle that money without it being accountable for. It is very easy for tankers, and I know this from first-hand experience, that tankers, a government can come in power and give tankers to their friends.
Right.
Tankers with millions of barrels of oil. Tell me how that can happen. It can only happen in a system that doesn't work, where there's no accountability.
Yeah.
So the reason why they've been tapping on oil is because A, they lack the understanding of what Nigeria actually has within its soil, within the land, and also because it was easier for them to embezzle that money. So they've continued with oil, and that's the truth.
Well, that's really terrible. And it's very unfortunate. So it's very unfortunate, as a Nigerian, and for many Nigerians as well. How have the mismanagement of resources affected the infrastructure and system in Nigeria?
Honestly, whether you look at the education system, which is grossly underfunded, or teachers not being paid. For those of you that live in Nigeria, you know what the public schools look like right now. For those of you who haven't, I would suggest that are Nigerian, go and visit Nigeria and see the dilapidated schools, So in terms of the education sector, the level of education has decreased massively over the decades. I remember when I was actually younger, which was not so long ago. You might be laughing at home right now, but seriously, it wasn't that long ago. And I remember that even at that point in time, Nigeria's education system, at least in terms of mathematics and sciences, they were actually ahead of their Western counterparts, especially in the UK. But all I can say is that as you continue to not pump that sufficient funds and resources into the education system, you're only going to be left with one thing. We can see, for instance, Nigerians in America, in the US, are the most educated group, even surpassing their Caucasian counterparts. So even surpassing the white Americans, they are the most educated group. And that is how Nigerians are. Wherever they go, they will thrive. So create a system for them and they will thrive. Now, if you look at the healthcare system, is there a healthcare system? That's a question I would like to ask you. Is there a healthcare system? Again, grossly underfunded over the decades. Now, if you look at the security apparatus in which that would provide stability and peace, even that's underfunded. The military, I'll give you an example. The army, many of those that are fighting Boko Haram in the northeast don't have sufficient equipment. The equipment that they were supposed to have been supplied, they haven't received them. Majority of them don't have the armored carriers, armored personnel carriers, APCs. Majority of them don't have enough tanks, and they don't have enough planes and jets and helicopters to support them in that fighting. And when a soldier dies, what is the remuneration package for his family? It's not even there. It's not even in place. They're not paid properly, and they're still out there risking their lives for the country. Now, if you talk about the police, come on, for any Nigerian who lives in Nigeria, how many policemen have you seen? Actually, they're trying to curtail it now. So now they don't do it openly. They come to your window, say, "Oh, God, well, anything for the boys." But it's still the same situation. Go and look at the police training academy. Go and have a look. Go and see the level of deprivation. I mean, I don't know. We could keep on going on and on and on and on. But you see, that's the thing. And then it brings you to another point. So it's underfunding throughout the sectors. The system doesn't work. The justice system, I'm sorry to say, by and large, is corrupt as well. The ordinary man, maybe will steal a mobile phone and will go to prison and stay there all his life. And then those politicians that are stealing billions of dollars will not be brought to justice. But that's another subject for another day. That's corruption. What can we say? But in terms of the system, the infrastructure, it's not working because it's underfunded. The roads, when you have governors with a helicopter, getting into his helicopter and flying, doesn't need to go on that road. Electricity, transport, railway systems. No constant electricity. Even with constant electricity, that would help. That would help the majority of Nigerians to be able to run their businesses better, and provide their daily bread. So we could go on and on and on and on and on and on. And even now with the Fulani herdsmen and the situation we're having, again, majority of Fulani herdsmen are not carrying weapons. Let me repeat that. There are militant groups amongst them, but even with the Fulani herdsmen, the Mayati Allah have been that group, their organisation, or one of their major organisations, has been asking for the Nigerian government to actually invest in water irrigation systems in the north of Nigeria, because they knew, because of the desertification, there was going to be, as time goes on, climate change, there's going to be less and less green in the north, right? So they were asking the government to invest water irrigation, to implement water irrigation systems like they have in Israel or in the US. And obviously that would keep the northern part, instead of being like masses of desert, there would be lush areas of green. But again, it's countless in terms of what Nigeria could do if it was funded better. So then you would have the cows feed in there, and why couldn't you have a system like we have in the UK or you have in other parts of the Western world? Why can't we have cattle trains? The cattle trains will still bring the cattle to the market, and the owners of the cattle will still receive their money, their funds. So I mean, again, it's not working because it's underfunded. But for it to be funded would still require leaders with vision.
Yes.
Without vision, people perish, and they are perishing. Yeah, that is the truth.
Yes, you're very right, and you made some very, very important points. But what would you say to someone watching? And like you said, we can go on about the many things that is, that Nigeria needs to fix. So, but why would you say Nigeria can be self-sufficient?
How can it be self-sufficient?
How can it be self-sufficient? My most entertaining question. No, I'm only joking. How can it be self-sufficient? Honestly, with the human resource that we have, 200 million people, 65% of those between 18 and 35. I keep on talking about them. I love the Nigerian people. You are ingenious, hardworking, inventive. These people, the people can produce anything. Mm-hmm. They can produce anything. Even if you leave mineral resources to the side, even if you leave those 50 major mineral resources to the side, think about the human resource that we have. That is our engine room. And you only have to look at Nigerians and see what they're inventing across the world. And even in Nigeria, drones, ventilation systems now with the COVID-19. I believe a Nigerian is even the one that's behind possibly the vaccine for COVID-19, or has found the vaccine for COVID-19. Then you have people like Emeka Emeagwali who built a supercomputer that can calculate over 1 billion calculations in a minute. That was one of the computers that was actually behind the Microsoft system. And that's also a Nigerian. And there's many Nigerians doing amazing things like Innocent Motors. And then you look at the mineral resources that Nigeria has. The mineral resources, if you get a chance, please, I'm going to post something about the byproducts, but if you look at the mineral resources and the byproducts that come from these mineral resources, you will see that Nigeria doesn't need to import at all. Nigeria, I'm going to go on record to say Nigeria does not need to import. Nigeria is it could close its borders and export for until Jesus comes. I can guarantee you Nigeria has everything. It has everything. Nigeria's been blessed with everything. The only thing that Nigeria doesn't have right now, like I said, going back to it, is the right leaders to take Nigeria forward. But if you want to talk about what does Nigeria have, Nigeria has everything. Yeah. Nigeria has everything. If the UK or many of these Western nations had Nigeria as a country, oh my gosh, they wouldn't even let you come in. Yeah, and they would turn that country to look like a nirvana. And honestly, I'm happy to go on record to say that even give me one state in Nigeria, one state in a part of Nigeria that you think doesn't have resources, because I hear it constantly from other parts, especially in the south. Oh, the north doesn't have this. The north has so many resources. Give me Kaduna State. I will turn Kaduna State to look better than Switzerland. Give me 4 years, I'll make Kaduna State look better than Switzerland. I can guarantee you that. Yeah.
No, you're very right. Nigerians are brilliant. Like you were saying earlier, they're brilliant, and when given the opportunity, they will thrive. When given the resources, the funding, they will thrive, because they're very hardworking. They're they're innovative as well, entrepreneurs as well. And so that leads me to the next question, because we talked about human resources earlier, but I wanted to elaborate and expand a little bit. Yeah. What is the Human Development Index? Why is it important?
The Human Development Index, or the HDI, is a UN stat-based report which looks at the three main areas that they look at. They look at the average life expectancy from birth. They look at the average number of years that the average person will be schooling, and they also look at what is the average capita income in a country. And what's very interesting is that, can you imagine that Nigeria, with its wastage of liquid petroleum gas, with its wastage of liquid petroleum gas, with its refineries that are barely operating, and that's why we're actually still sending oil. Believe it or not, we're still sending oil to be refined by the US and the UK for us to now buy back refined oil, which, again, I know it doesn't make sense at all, and I do wonder, you know, sometimes who are those think tanks, but it doesn't make any sense. So even with all those things, and even with those resources that are untapped, millions of tons of it, and we haven't touched on it. We're going to touch on it more of it at the end of this episode. But even with that, Nigeria is the 24th largest economy in the world.
Wow.
How is that? I mean, that's amazing. I think it's honestly amazing. The 24th largest economy in the world. But in the Human Development Index, which shows how much a government invests into its people, let's look at the statistics. According to their statistics, the average Nigerian will live approximately 55 years.
Wow.
Yeah. The average Nigerian will only receive 10 years of schooling, and the average Nigerian earns between $2 to $5 a day. So even though we are the 24th largest economy in the world, we're actually 158th ranking in the world for Human Development
Wow.
Index. That's crazy.
Wow.
And if that's it's pitiful, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's
terrible.
truly sad.
It's terrible.
That is sad. There's so many, and like you said, and this is another thing that frustrates a lot of Nigerians, and a lot of, because of the lack of opportunity to thrive in Nigeria, they take all their knowledge abroad.
Yeah.
They take it and they invest it into this economy and add to the economy of the West End. But you can't blame them at the same time, because we have a government who is not invested in their people. The education is just non-existent. You have people who can't speak properly, and it's not their fault as well. And it's very frustrating as a Nigerian, you know, to see and to hear, because you want your people to do well. You know, what is the way forward for Nigeria?
You know, I want to say one thing, because you touched on something, and over many years, people have spoken of a brain drain in Nigeria. But honestly, it's not true. To this point in time, God is good.
Right.
To this point in time, Nigeria is still churning out brains. They're still churning out
That's true.
extremely educated, you know, ingenious individuals. And that's why it just shocks me when I think about Nigeria. I'm amazed. I'm seriously amazed. We talk about China. Look at their technological advances. Let me tell you something. Up until 1984, China was nowhere on the map in terms of technology. What China has is they have a people that are working together as one. They're saying, we're going to thrive. We're going to prosper. We're going to help this government to help us to prosper. Let me tell you something about China, just on a touch. I visited China. I've also visited Nigeria, obviously, countless times, but I visited Nigeria. Do you know that in China, this is a government that also helps their people. In China, because of the land and constantly trying to build on that land and build more and more accommodation, sometimes they need to take over agricultural areas. Do you know what they do for those villagers that have, say, a farm and they need to build an apartment block? They don't just give them money, they give them 2 apartments in that apartment block. So they don't just give them money, they give them 2 apartments in that apartment block. I mean, look, the government, and again, like I said, forward thinkers. They saw, even though they are a socialist government, they saw that they don't have the right level of technology to carry them further, to take them where they needed to go, to where their goal was, to achieve their goal. So what they said is, around 1984, they decided to bring in European and American and Western specialists in technology, in the technology sector, to come and start to invest and to train the Chinese. The Chinese that are now advanced ahead of most other countries.
Right.
They're probably the most advanced if you want to talk about it technologically. Where did that start? 1984, because the leaders had vision. It's the same for Nigeria. All it needs is leaders with vision. So if you ask me, because that's the question you asked me, what is the way forward? The way forward is for Nigerians to understand, hopefully by this platform, by the right information, as I said before, not misinformation and not disinformation, but the right and correct information being pumped out through the airwaves, through the TV network, whichever way it can be, paper written to the Nigerian people for them to understand what they have, what they've been given, and to understand who are their real enemies. As we mentioned it before, their enemies are not other tribes.
Yes.
Their enemies are not even other religions.
Yeah.
Their enemies are those elitists with invested interests that say those 200 million or that 99% of that population must not have an opportunity to stand, to live in peace, to thrive, to be prosperous. Those are the real enemies of the Nigerian people. Those are the real enemies of any tribe in Nigeria, not the tribes themselves. So first they must receive the information that will empower them and emancipate them. And then they must stand as one and decide that, listen, we are not going to vote for a government again, that a politician that comes again and says, listen, I'll give you a bag of gari. What is a bag of gari, a bag of rice, going to do for you?
That's right.
For the next 4 years?
Yeah.
When your children, you can't afford to send them to school, or you can't even afford to put your daily bread on the table. You don't have running electricity. You don't have jobs. What is that bag of gari going to do for you? So that requires a change of mindset. A change of mindset of the people. The way forward is the people. Let me say it again. The way forward is the people, because the power is in the hands of all you Nigerians. The real power is in your hands. If you say today, if you join together as one and you say no more, trust me, those that are oppressing you, they will crumble. They will crumble. Because they cannot fight all the people.
Yeah.
They cannot fight all the people. It's not statistically possible. Out of 200 million people, even if we say those who cannot fight are 30%. Let's just say those who cannot fight are 30%. That is 60 million people. That will still leave you, and let's say that the security apparatus and those that are oppressing you are 1 million. That will still leave you 139 million people. I'm not calling up for arms. I'm saying the people have to say enough is enough.
Yes.
When the time comes for election, if that is the way that God has said it, if the time comes for election, the people have to say, listen, let us put aside our political affiliations. Let us put aside our tribal differences. Let us put aside those differences of man and female, sex differences. Let's put them all aside. And let's say we are going to join as one. We're going to unite. We are going to look for that party, that person, that leader, that party that can truly take Nigeria forward. And I tell you one thing, if the Nigerian people decide to do that, and I include the church in this as well, including the church, if the Nigerian people decide to do that, trust me, you will see, no one will ever leave Nigeria apart from to go on holiday. There was a time, even as we are dependent on oil, we're not dependent on oil, but even though a time where all we were tapping was oil, I remember in the early 80s, Nigerians didn't come to live. in what we call Oyibo. They didn't come to live in no Western country. That is a lie. They came only to visit. Nigerians used to go to Arabs, shop and go back to Nigeria. That's how it was. And I can guarantee you, that's how it's going to be again.
Yeah.
And at that time, Nigeria, at one point in time, Naira was 2 Naira to 1 pound. And at one point in time, it was even 1 Naira to 1 pound.
Wow.
And even at one point in time, it was 1 Naira to 2 pounds. I tell you, the time is coming where it will be 1 Naira to 20 pounds. It just requires the people. It requires the people. And that's what this movement is about. We will continue to educate the people. But you, the people, have to decide. You have to say, enough is enough. Our problems, again, I repeat, are not other tribes.
Yes,
it's not other regions. People are suffering in Nigeria in every region, every state and every tribe. People are suffering. If you talk about lack of justice, it's happening everywhere. Even in the north of Nigeria, where certain states have Sharia law. You will hear a man or a woman stole, or they were caught in adultery, they were stoned. Or a man or woman stole and their hand was cut off. But what about all those elitists that are stealing billions upon billions of dollars? So Sharia law is not for them, or what? No, listen, the way forward, Nigeria needs a census, first of all. Because we really need to know truly in each state, in each area, what is the population. Maybe some regions need to have more states because they actually have a larger population. If that's the case, let it be so. That is not necessarily, it's part of restructuring, but it's not necessarily the only solution. No, because we need to have a system that works, infrastructure that works, and we need to have a system that will bring about and harbor and produce greater accountability. I'll give you an example. Buhari was petroleum minister. Let me just tell you, I'm not bashing Buhari, I just like to speak facts. Buhari was petroleum minister when $2.5 billion of NNPC oil money went missing. Now, I'm not saying Buhari took it, but he is the minister. So he should know who took it. That's what I'm trying to say about accountability. We have to have systems in place. You are accountable if you are a minister of petroleum for those that are under you. You are accountable.
That's right.
And if it's not the people under you and it's the person above you, then let that person be known as well. Everyone must be held accountable from the president down.
That's true.
Has to be held accountable, and I'll go on record, and I'm gonna be straight out with this, and I'm telling you, it doesn't matter to me because I believe in integrity. Even in, and I'll say it, speak it as the Lord has spoken it, even in my own cabinet, in governance in Nigeria, even if it's my friend, if that person is corrupt, he will face justice. If it's my son, if he's corrupt, he'll face justice. Justice, it must be equal for all, not by what you have in your bank account. Truth must be free for all, not what tribe you come from. And love must be for all, no matter what region you come from. Enough of nepotism. Enough of nepotism. We don't need that in Nigeria anymore. We don't need because my relative is in presidency, I should expect that he's going to look after, at least he'll look after my people, but he won't look after the others. No, enough of that. Enough of that. The way forward is unity with the people, the correct information, and a lot of hard work, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But once we get there, we will thrive, we will prosper, we will be stable, and we will be a peaceful nation.
Amen.
And certainly a nation to be reckoned with
Amen.
on the world stage.
Amen, amen. Wow, so some very, very important points that you mentioned. Just to highlight that, one nation, one voice. Again, we're standing for love for all, truth for all, justice for all. And there's a scripture that, for those who are Christians might know, it says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. For Nigeria to stand, we have to stand united. Stand united. And there's something that he said, visionary people will actually drive visionary leaders. Visionary leaders will drive visionary people as well. Yeah. So it's a two-way thing. Not just visionary leaders without the visionary people. So we are trying to educate you as well on what is your right, on what is yours, so that you can actually drive your leaders and we can create a change, because it's a circle. It's an ecosystem of everyone catching the vision that we as Nigerians deserve to be treated equally, deserve to enjoy what God gave us in our land. And we're going to be rounding up, but I don't know if you wanted to add anything before we round up.
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln once said, a country of the people, by the people,
that's it,
for the people. Nigeria is a country at this point in time of the people. I wouldn't necessarily say it's by the people, and it's definitely not for the people. But that can change. Yeah. That can change, and change is no longer like we've been hearing. Change is coming. We're a party of change. Change really is in the hands of the people. Mm-hmm. It is really in the hands of the people. The time will come where Nigerians will have the opportunity to have their say and put their actions where their mouth is, and they'll get the chance to move. And I know it's going to come. Yeah. It's definitely going to come. But for those Nigerians out there who are disgruntled, frustrated, wondering how is Nigeria ever going to change, and even amongst those who are believers who wonder, and I know I've spoken to them, who wonder if Nigeria can ever change. For those believers, I will say to them, remember, the Bible says that God is able to breathe on the dry bones and bring them to life. So if he can bring the dry bones to life, it can most certainly can cause Nigeria to rise from the ashes.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, for watching this live video. We are glad that you are stayed till the very end.
Thank you.
Please make sure you go onto our Facebook page. It's One Nation, One Voice, and we have a lot of posts and videos as well, just educating Nigerians. And please share. We want to get this message to as all the Nigerians as possible, so they can know their rights, they can know what they deserve as Nigerians as well. Thank you, and see you next week.
And before we go, if you have any questions, we will be having these Q&As like every 2 weeks. The next one will be 2 weeks from now. Please send them through, send messages, post them on the website or on Facebook, and we will endeavour to answer those questions for you.
Yes.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
God bless you.